We're starting Chapter 3 now, Statistics. In this unit, we will be reviewing the statistical process and covering some vocabulary. When you're beginning a statistical study, you first start by identifying the population that you are interested in studying. You identify what you want to know about that population, and that is called your parameter. You gather data, and ideally it's an unbiased sample, to perform an experiment or gather observations from. From that, you can graph your data or calculate summary statistics. And from that small subset of data, you can estimate the parameter that you were looking for and determine how close you were to that parameter by describing the margin of error and the confidence interval. So the population is the target of the study. It's the group that we want to know something about. The parameter is a value, a percentage, an average, some number that you can measure in some way. It's the thing that you're interested in knowing about that whole population. But because we can't gather an entire population together in order to study it, we will take a sample or a representative sample, which is a smaller subset of the entire population. The statistic is a value that is calculated using the data from that sample. The parameter, P and P, go together. The parameter is a measurement for the population that you're trying to find. You got your sample and your statistic. They are the smaller subset that you can work with. So that's how I remember those vocabulary terms. All right. In this first activity, a researcher wants to know how the citizens of Portland feel about a voter initiative. To do this, they go to downtown Pioneer Place Mall and survey 500 shoppers. 60% indicate that they are supportive of the initiative. So I want you to try to identify the population. What's the big group we're looking at? The parameter. What's the value that we're trying to find from that big group? Who's the sample? What's the subset of the population that you found? And what was the statistic? So the population is the citizens of Portland. The parameter is what we're trying to know about the citizens of Portland. And so we want to know, let's say, the percentage of voters who support the initiative. The sample is the subset that we found, 500 shoppers. The statistic is the value that we found from that sample, 60% of shoppers were in support. All right, so things that you might ask yourself about this would be, is this a very good study? Did they get an accurate subset to look at? Was there bias in going to just Pioneer Place Mall and asking shoppers about this initiative? And so what we look at when we're trying to determine if this is a good study is the method that they went through. So there's a few sampling methods that you can have. One is the simple random sample, abbreviated SRS. It's one in which every member of the population has an equal probability of being chosen. And in the example that we just went through, that wasn't true. Not every single member of Portland is equally likely to be at the mall at Pioneer Place. A stratified sample is when a population is divided into a number of groups or strata. Random samples are then taken from each subgroup. In a systematic sampling, every nth member of a population is selected to be in the sample. And then a convenience sample, which is the one that I would argue they did, is when samples are chosen by selecting whomever is convenient. So it's maybe looking at the people in your class and saying, would you like to take a survey? In this next activity, you're going to match which one of these sampling methods above are being described below. And we will do this in class. So this will be some of our group work that we'll do. You can skip it for right now. No matter how good most samples are, there will be bias in the sample. And sometimes that bias is purposeful. So a sampling or selection bias is when the sample is not representative of the population. A voluntary response bias is when the sample is made of volunteers. So maybe you see someone outside of New Seasons and they're holding a clipboard and you walk the other way. So only people willing to talk and volunteer to be a part of the study end up being a part of the study. That creates a voluntary response bias, which is a type of sampling bias. There's a self-interest bias, which can occur when the researcher has an interest in the outcome. They may ask questions in a particular way, or stop gathering data once they have reached a certain conclusion. There's a generic response bias when the responder gives inaccurate responses for any reason. There's perceived lack of anonymity when the responder fears giving an honest answer might negatively affect them. You could ask loaded questions. It's when the wording influences the responses, and you could have a non-response bias, when people refuse to participate in a study or drop out of an experiment. You can no longer be certain that the sample is representative of the population when that occurs. In class, you'll be determining if the following have bias, and they do, and which bias they have. So this will also be group work.